Welcome everybody to this Culture and Creativity Policy Network meeting. The CCPN is based at the University of Southampton and it's coordinated by myself and Joseph Owen, who's also on the call. And the network amplifies creative policy making and cultural policy research expertise at the university. And we do different kinds of events. We do review sessions that discuss and identify news, events, and policies, and dialogue sessions, which are about exploring different approaches and experiences with policymaking and creative approaches to policymaking. And this is our seventh in the series, and we're very, very pleased to welcome Professor Lucy Kimbell. Lucy's talk is on policy design, logics, practices, and tensions. Lucy is a professor of contemporary design practices at Central St Martin's, University of the Arts London, where she convenes the Policy Futures Studio. So really exciting, very close to our hearts and interests, and really looking forward to welcoming Lucy for a exploration discussion kind of presentation. It's from the way we're talking, it's going to be lots of pictures, which we look forward to. And then after that, we'll have plenty of time for discussion afterwards. So a big thank you for everybody coming and a big welcome to Lucy. Over to you. Thanks, Lucy.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation. So I'm going to talk for about 20 minutes, hopefully, and definitely show some pictures. So I will just share my screen now. Hopefully I will do that in the correct way. No, is that the way? Here we go. Okay, now I can't see any of you. Or maybe on another screen over there. Okay, so this is the grand title, Policy and Design Logics, Practices and Tensions. I'm not sure I'm covering exactly all of that, but these are the things that are maybe operating in the space between design and public policy. Thank you for the introduction. Just to add that I'm a design researcher, and my sort of areas are really design theory, social design, and design for policy. And I'm based at Central St Martin's. Here's a picture. So it's at Granary Square at King's Cross. It's sort of doing culture in a major bit of central London, quite performative, really. So it's an art school tradition with all aspects of art, design, and communications across the wider University of the Arts London. And relevant to today, I'm going to mention some of the research I led for the UK Civil Services Cross-Government Public Design Evidence Review. Previously, I've taught design mostly now not to designers, but to MBA students and civil servants via Oxford or at Oxford. And I also have a background as an artist and designer. So there is a sort of sense of this coming, the way I'm thinking about this coming from a creative practice, although these days I do less of that, although some. I also wanted to mention very briefly, I co-lead a Marie Curie funded doctoral network with the title Sustainable Transitions Through Democratic Design. We have 13 fully funded doctoral students. Fully funded means they have a quite decent salary to do their doctoral study at 8 universities and 7 European countries. And given the title, Sustainable Transitions Through Democratic Design, and it's so basically the intersection between design, public policy, and sustainable transitions, that might be of interest to members of the network. We have an event in Milan in a couple of weeks, and then which is open to the public, and another one in Warsaw next year. So should you be interested in that intersection, we will be starting to publish more in the coming year. So let's start with defining design. Some of you may design researchers, so forgive me for my very light skim with pictures. But defining design is an ongoing problematic in theories of design, partly because design is associated with modernity, 19th century consumption production, 20th century, and now 21st century. But also the word design is used and defined in engineering, in computer science, and also in strands of management and organization studies. So design could look like this, the design of forms in society and in an environment, what Christopher Alexander called vernacular design, where there isn't a designer as such, but there is definitely a design that possibly doesn't change over many years or even many centuries. There's this kind of design, very much tied to modernity, production and consumption, this lemon squeezer by Philippe Starck. There's also the intersection with computation and digitalization. This picture I took in New York, possibly the day after Steve Jobs died. I happened to be in New York and went by an Apple shop. And there, in the Apple shop, were all these people who'd left flowers and left post-it notes. And you see that sad Mac icon showing the strength of feeling of consumers, people who are presumably Apple purchasers, users of Apple products who've wanted to express their sense of grief individually, but to do so collectively at the death of a corporate executive, an organization that's widely considered as making design central to its innovation practices. So that's another kind of design and consequences of design. There's also things like this. This is a photo possibly I took during something we called a policy sprint inside the then Cabinet Office-based Policy Lab team, where I was on an AHRC fellowship. So this is from about March 2015. Oh, it says January. Okay, it was January 2015. So this was a 2 or possibly a week-long event, bringing together different civil servants and others to explore a policy issue that crossed 2 departments. And you can see here a version of co-design being facilitated by someone with expertise in that to bring together their shared understanding and generate things together. So this is very much present as a practice in bits of the civil service, which I'm going to talk about today, but more broadly in aspects of contemporary design practices. And this is another version of design, which is a squiggle, just trying to describe the design process. So the squiggle being a visual representation of something that's messy, and what that looks like as a practice rather than a structured, linear way of working. So this is reminding me to say that a lot of the contemporary articulations of design are about its process and how that is conceptualized and then embedded into organizational life. So these are just 5 different ways of thinking of design historically and in the contemporary. And I'm now going to talk mostly about design in public policy and government. There's actually quite a long track record now. My awareness of this field of design being used in public services dated to about 2005. This is a slightly later public resource that was created specifically for design in healthcare, in the NHS, in closed systems like the NHS. Called experience-based co-design, where predominantly social scientists and organization studies researchers saw in the practices of design something that could bring, something new to challenges of doing healthcare innovation. And this public toolkit is a later expression of some of that early research, which is ongoing. There is now a very lively and ongoing quite evidence-based community in the healthcare space, which is mobilizing, using and evaluating design practices in healthcare systems. There's also things like this, the Global GovJam, running since about 2014, 13 or so, happening annually, which is a weekend sometimes, or a couple of days where people get together in a very self-organized way around the world. and do a jam or a co-design sessions, working often with local stakeholders to try and address some kind of policy or public service issue, often initiated by a government team or public service team, and working in a quite open way, and all doing it at the same moment in time. So this is mobilizing that agile, let's say agile ways of working, and is a self-organized and quite dispersed form of doing design in relation to public services and government. There's also very established teams, such as the Government Digital Service, that has quite a particular narrative about its origins in the coalition government from late 2010, 2011, with a review of public services, digital public services, which then led to the establishment of a whole capability called the Government Digital Service in the UK, with articulations such as this. This screen shows the development process, and it's notable because you can see here it is iterative. There is something called discovery, which is a term widely used in software development, agile development, which is the first phase, then an alpha prototype with a small scale or small sample, a beta prototype with a larger sample, and then going live with those arrows showing at least an intention to continue iterating. This is specifically for digital services, but this is now pretty much embedded across the whole of the UK civil service and aspects of local government digital services. The other notable thing at the front end of this box or this process are the words user needs. So in the public presentation and the methods and tools and the capability, user needs are put first, or at least said to be put first, and in terms of delivering that delivering that digital public service. There's also been a plethora of toolkits produced by many different organisations, including some that I've produced. This one is a screen grab from the OECD's Observatory for Public Sector Innovation. It has a toolkit of toolkits. So you see here on this screen, there's some by Nesta, for example, and other types of intermediary or sometimes government department or local government or civil society organisation, which are all gathered as a resource for those who are trying to do innovation, including through the mode of design, although not exclusively. And in this field too, there are also growing formal capabilities or structures inside government. This screen grab is from the UK Civil Services, what they call the Government Digital and Data Profession. So this is defining the individual job roles, competences required, which are then structured into civil service jobs. And that includes roles associated with design, like user researcher, a service designer, and so on. Although, as you can see, very specifically to do with digital and data. This does not, for example, cover policy design. There's also then public articulation, such as this quite long-standing blog set up by Policy Lab, the team I worked with in 2014-15 that I showed you a photo of earlier. So this is where you can find descriptions of some of their projects and their evolving articulations of what it is they're doing and who they're doing it with. And this is specifically a page from their prospectus, which is basically a PowerPoint deck where they explain in more detail what it is they're doing. And I think something like 250 projects that by that stage, 10 years in, they had been working on across government departments. And this is a screen from that, which shows, as part of that articulation, how they were conceptualizing it in 2024, after 10 years. So what you can see here where my cursor is, they're using the sort of ladders of participation model. So inform, consult, involve, collaborate, and empower. So that's a version of that ladder. And then here, this is a version of the policy cycle: setting direction, creating a strategy or vision, identifying policies, designing programs, services, and investments, iterating or scaling, learning what works, and then continuing round. And what they've done here is map specific methods over those different phases of participation and phases of the policy cycle. In other countries, as they develop a design capability in government, which is often starts with digital design, but not only, they develop things like this kind of framework. So this is from the Irish government that published its principles in, well, it's been iterative over several years. So for example, here, right, where is it? Principle 1, we will put people first. Principle 2, we will design to be inclusive. Principle 3, we will design services together, and so on. So this is being developed in a central bit of the UK, sorry, the Irish civil service, but is definitely being developed as a capability around these principles across pockets of the Irish state departments. And this is another image from that. There's also other kinds of exploration. This image comes from a student project. So this is MA students in service design at my university, University of the Arts London, from specifically that Masters in Service Design. This was part of a project run by the EU Policy Lab. So that's a team in the Joint Research Centre of the European Commission. So that's a sort of research institute in the centre of the Commission, which has a team which specifically includes exploration of design for policy. And I show this image because it's something that is a speculative design. So it's not what you've seen in the earlier slides, which is dealing with contemporary issues and trying to bring a design process to that. It's using a particular approach called speculative design to create something that doesn't exist and possibly shouldn't exist as a way of sparking conversation. The brief from that team in the European Commission was looking at the future of government in 2030. This project was done in 2018-19, so 2030 seemed a long way away at that time, where it's horrifyingly close at the moment. But I helped them work with 6 design schools across Europe, including UAL, in response to the brief, which was to take some future scenarios that central team in the JRC had developed about the intersection, in particular, of technology and different technological futures and how democracy might play out. And then the students were invited to imagine what that might look like. And our students, or the students who worked on this brief, what you see here, imagined a world where you get a tax bill every month because there's so much surveillance of your activities that rather than calculating your tax at the end of the year based on your income, such as we have in the UK, the tax actually was assessed by the risks that you took and what you might cost a government in the future with this vast amount of surveillance, and that you'd get a bill every month and it might look like this. So this is using this speculative approach to create a form, here a touch point or an object that you might get from government, your monthly tax bill, and imagining that in somebody's day-to-day life that's realised in this photo to spark discussion. So briefly, that set of things were just showing different sort of occasions and moments through which people are working in different ways, exploring this intersection of design and government. I'm now going to, let me look at the time. Oh no, that's already 17 minutes. So I will just talk through very briefly this example, which is award-winning from it was carried out by a design agency called Engine, working for the HM Courts and Tribunal Service, where there was a substantive problem with immigration and asylum appeals. And as part of the work, this design organization worked with that team, or very much the system across asylum and appeals, to understand people's journeys as they interacted with the tribunal service during their asylum appeal. They focused on human stories. They worked directly with people making appeals to understand what happened to them as they went through this experience. And then they worked with people across the system, including judges, solicitors, and policymakers, to also understand what was going on, and then ultimately designing together, or informed by those insights and perspectives, what is a better system. I do need to make clear here, they weren't designing the policy. The policy around asylum appeals would have been set by, I guess, the Home Office. This was about improving the process or the experience and the effectiveness of the people making the appeals, and the uses of tribunals' time and the demands are made on professionals involved, such as solicitors and civil society and so on. So that's an example of a practical project. There are remarkably few such projects in the public domain. This one is in a quite limited way because it won an award. However, you can now find some more examples. The Public Design Evidence Review was published last July. So this is published jointly by the policy profession, which is a cross-civil service grouping of those involved in policy development, and the Cabinet Office. And we had a launch event at UAL with then Cabinet Office Minister Georgia Gould MP, and also a senior civil servant, then also in the Cabinet Office. And in the way of things, both of them no longer work in the Cabinet Office. But what this did was, for the first time, bring together different understandings of all that design stuff in government. So not simply in relation to making policy, but also about delivery, and included that example I've just shown you, that case study, and a number of others, as well as different perspectives. And I led the academic research on this, and as part of our contribution, oh look, here's some things here we go. I'm saying, so there's interviews with design leaders from across the world, well, mostly in Eurocentric, similar contexts, similar democratic kind of structures. It also included academic analysis and reflections by a team in the DWP that's been working in a similar way, and some literature reviews. And I wanted to show this image, this one here. So with two political scientists, Professor Liz Richardson from Manchester, and Professor Catherine Duros from University of Liverpool, and Professor Rainer Kattel from the Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose at UCL, who's more of a innovation and economics scholar. We me and the three of them, wrote a quite large document. I think it's about 17,000 words, that's published as part of that review. And in that, one of the things we did was produce a new version of the policy cycle, recognizing that it is not an accurate way of describing how policy is made, but showing where the contributions of design might lie. The first is got this background lozenge, that those stages of the policy cycle relate always to people's experiences and situated experiences of the policy or the intervention in context. So it is always relational to experience. A second contribution is that there's these little arrows here, that the specific phase is always iterated in relation to that experience. And thirdly, that there's these arrows to and fro and across the whole cycle. So usually the policy cycle is a lovely clean circle, as if there's no interactions between, and here we've got these different feedback loops between them. So it's basically making a case for relating the public policy cycle in relation to lived experience, lived and situated experience, and contextualizing it in broader literatures, as well as across all that evidence gathered by the review, producing a kind of framework about what it is that design is bringing to government. So I'm going to briefly, since I'm now 22 minutes. Okay, good. So we have a little more time to actually then look at the academic research. So this intersection between design and policy, as I've shown, has been growing and has these different sort of sites of where it's happening, both volunteer-based and civil society-based, as well as in public administrations and indeed design consultancies and indeed universities. So with my colleagues, Liz Richardson, Catherine Duros, and Ramia Mazet, who's from my university, Professor Ramia Mazet, we had an AHRC network bringing together design researchers such as me, as well as political science or political theory researchers such as Liz and Catherine, as well as civil servants and practitioners in design. And I'm not going to talk about that network. You can find details online. But what we then did is this paper, which was published a year ago in Policy and Politics, where we tried on a meta level to think about the relationships that design and policy, what kind of relationships existed. We distinguished between the purpose of design and the scope and nature of policy making, and then found three different ways of understanding that relationship. And I'll briefly summarize these. So if the purpose of design is to support achieving prior specified goals of policy making, and the scope and nature of policy making is a quite technocratic endeavour where policy operates within a single worldview, we call that an instrumental relationship where design is very much a tool. And you could say that the example I very briefly showed of the Courts and Tribunals Immigration Appeals Service is an example of that. It wasn't going to change the policy. It had a particular sort of fixed worldview, but it was trying to make a much better service and system. If you take the middle band, if we take the purpose of design as to enable policy making to be more open in the face of unfolding events and experiences, and if we see the scope and nature of policy making as a responsive process where policy negotiates among plural worldviews, then we call that an improvisational relationship where design is a practice of interacting within policy making. And then the third band or logic is if we see the purpose of design is to facilitate the re-envisioning of policy making, and if we see the scope and nature of policy making as a generative space where policy emerges from the decentering of different worldviews, then we call that a generative relationship where design practices regenerate policy making. And we offer some examples in the paper. It's a conceptual paper, but we don't say that any one of these are going to be dominant. And in fact, an individual project might have several of these going on at a given moment. And obviously, we're hoping to do some further research on this ourselves, and it's being used, for example, already as a framing by the Joint Research Centre's EU Policy Lab team. They finding it useful to analyse and structure the different types of things they're doing in their work in this design and policy space. So I was just going to show some examples of the instrumental use. So you could argue that this kind of framework developed by the Government Digital Service is arguably an example of the instrumental, where the job of the digital service designer is to deliver government policy. However, even with this articulation you've got here, where user needs are sort of bang at the front, the user needs may be in contrast or in conflict with the government policy. So this rather sort of nice, simple, clear diagram potentially has more going on than an instrumental version. And ditto, even though I gave as an example the Courts and Tribunals project, where you could say that potentially they were instrumentally just, trying to capture and understand the lived experience of these people making appeals in response to decisions made about their immigration status. Actually, you could say that at various moments the worldviews might exceed or go beyond the current state of policy, or even though that was not going to be changed by this project. As examples in the improvisational relationship between design and policy, this example I showed before, so this is the first policy sprint that Policy Lab Cabinet Office team then in the Cabinet Office did. So this is, quite was definitely an unfolding, and recognising the policy process itself was sort of co-produced. This is arguably another example of improvisational, where Policy Lab in a later project from 2019 worked with various actors about what the future of the maritime industry might be, including autonomous shipping. And among the activities in that project, they developed these cards with different short scenarios. As you can see here, there's an image and then a heading and then a short text to spark discussion and enable stakeholders or in that shipping sector to have conversations about what the future might be, allowing again possibly emergent views. The generative space is the one that I have more pictures for, possibly because I'm more interested in it. So here's an example where from Dubai, from the Museum of the Future, that's a whole other conversation we could have about non-global north, non-Western, non-Eurocentric versions of policy designing within different traditions. But very briefly, there's a strong emphasis on building capabilities in futures in the UAE, specifically in Dubai. There is this museum called the Museum of the Future, and that includes a number of installations and visitor experiences which allow you to explore what the future might be like, which are generative and quite open-ended, even though there's arguably a sort of meta-narrative tied to the UAE and its national strategy. But then these kinds of things, these installations and workshops and so on, potentially disrupt some of those smooth narratives. There's also things like this. So I mentioned the EU Policy Lab as part of the Joint Research Centre in the EC. They had an event in April this year called Poly Futures, and so I've taken a couple of pictures from that. This is they had a small exhibition as part of that 2-day event. And this included work which you can see here is very materialized, right? This is again another materialized way of opening up conversation among participants, to spark conversation, to try and surface lived experience, situated experience, and possibly challenge or disrupt framings. And this workshop, which I participated in, specifically looked at what a future policy in the future context of young people's experience in 2040. So what would be the lives like of 20-year-olds in the year 2040? And as part of this workshop, where they had developed these materials, including through horizon scanning, looking at weak signals to imagine what the lives of young people in Europe, age 20, might be like in 2040. They created 4 backpacks, and our participants, as participants in the workshop, we were invited to open the backpack, take out the objects, and these were associated with one persona from the future. And through this hour and a half of exploration around a table, we were able to explore what that future might be like for a particular young person and the future itself, which also raised questions about the nature of evidence, obviously there isn't any evidence of the future, and so how does one make policy, and how does is this valid as a mode of making policy when you've got strange objects from the future in a backpack and you don't quite know what to do with it. So it also destabilized assumptions about policy making itself. And then very briefly last year, this was last year, I led a workshop also using futures techniques with residents of Rathlin Island, which is off Ulster, the north coast of Ulster. This is part of an AHRC funded project that I'm involved in, which is led by Belfast School of Art. So, all right, now we're on 33 minutes and I am going to stop. And here's just a list of, some things that are, are tensions or research areas. Obviously, epistemology, aesthetics and imagination, and then the institutionalization and routinization of these practices inside public administrations, and then the consequences and outcomes of deploying design. So among other questions, these are the ones that I think are particularly interesting, and I will stop.
So a big thank you to everybody who came and for the discussion exchange, and a special big thanks to Lucy for such a really brilliant presentation. Thank you very much, Lucy.
Thank you.